Welcome to the Marketing Behind Rapid Growth, the podcast where we explore the strategies, decisions, and growth engines behind some of the world's most successful technology companies. Today, we're talking about Okta. Picture an office building in the early 2000s. It has walls, locked doors, a front desk, a badge reader. Everything a company needed to protect was inside those walls. Security was, in a very real sense, architecture. Now picture that building dissolving. Not all at once, but piece by piece as companies moved their data, their tools, their entire operations into the cloud. The walls didn't just get thinner, they disappeared. That's the world Todd McKinnon saw coming in early 2009, while he was still a senior engineering executive at Salesforce. He wrote a memo to his boss, Mark Benioff. It wasn't a pitch for a clever app or a slick consumer product. It was a warning. As companies abandoned their own data centers for the cloud, the traditional security perimeter was evaporating. And nobody, not IT teams, not security leaders, not the employees juggling a dozen different passwords, had a good answer for what came next. That memo became the seed of Okta. And this is the story of how a company built its entire growth strategy around a single counterintuitive idea, that refusing to pick a side could be the most powerful competitive advantage of all. Part 1. The Wedge. Okta wasn't the founder's first idea. When Todd McKinnon and his Salesforce colleague Frederick Karrast incorporated the company in 2009, they called it Sasher, and they were focused on systems monitoring. It was a reasonable business. It just wasn't a necessary one. And as they talked to prospective customers, a different pattern kept surfacing. Monitoring was nice to have. Identity was existential. Companies were drowning in fragmented cloud applications, and nobody controlled who had access to what. That was the real fire. So they pivoted and they made a bet that looked risky at the time. They would build a cloud-native platform at a moment when giants like Microsoft and Oracle were still deeply anchored to on-premises software. It was a bit like choosing to build for streaming while the rest of the industry was still optimizing DVDs. They renamed the company Okta, a meteorological term for cloud cover. The name itself was a small piece of marketing genius. It signaled clarity and control right at the moment when the shift to cloud computing felt like anything but. Their first product was cloud-based single sign-on. This is a classic growth strategy move. Find the wedge. Single sign-on solved an immediate visceral problem: password fatigue. The mountain of help desk tickets generated every week by employees who forgot which password went with which tool. Okta could deploy this solution dramatically faster than the legacy alternatives, and that speed became its entry point into companies that were already living in the cloud. Part 2. The bet on neutrality. As Okta grew, it ran into the most dangerous kind of competitor. Not another startup, but a platform giant. Microsoft, through Azure and Office 365, could simply bundle identity management, what it now calls Entra ID, directly into the productivity suite most companies already paid for. For a CFO looking at a budget, free is a very persuasive word. This is the moment where a lot of companies would have panicked and tried to outfeature the giant. Okta did something more interesting. It stopped competing on features and started competing on independence. Here was the argument, and it was elegant. If you let Microsoft manage your identity, you are quietly being pressured to choose Microsoft for everything else too. Your email, your documents, your collaboration tools. Identity becomes the gateway drug to total platform lock-in. Okta, by contrast, integrated with thousands of applications, and it made a virtue out of playing no favorites. It positioned itself as the neutral arbiter sitting above the tech stack, the layer that let a company use any tool it wanted, safely, without being funneled into one vendor's ecosystem. This is where the marketing story gets sophisticated. Microsoft was selling a suite. Okta was selling an ecosystem. And that neutrality wasn't just a message for customers. It became a strategic alliance strategy. Because Okta refused to build a competing platform, companies like AWS, Google, and Salesforce, who also didn't want their customers trapped inside a rival's identity silo, had every reason to partner with Okta rather than fight it. Neutrality, in other words, wasn't a limitation. It was the product. Part 3. From product story to company story. In its early years, Okta's marketing was deeply technical. Speeds, feeds, protocol standards, the kind of language that makes sense to an engineer evaluating a purchase and means nothing to anyone else. As the company scaled, CMO Ryan Carlson recognized a critical distinction. A product solves a problem. A company creates a category. And if Okta wanted to grow beyond being known as the SSO tool, it needed a bigger story. It needed to become, in its own words, the world's identity company. You can see that shift play out in the evolution of Okta's annual conference, Octane. What started as a user training event slowly transformed into a thought leadership summit, where leadership reframed identity itself as the new perimeter of global security. That's not a small rhetorical move. It repositions Okta from a vendor selling a tool to a company defining an entire category of risk. But the journey wasn't clean. Carlson was candid about one misstep. He once believed a CMO should have the pipeline target essentially tattooed on their forehead, and he leaned so hard into short-term lead generation that the team quietly stopped investing in things like PR and brand awareness, because those activities didn't show up in next quarter's pipeline numbers. The problem is that brand and pipeline aren't actually separate ledgers. When you stop building the brand, pipeline eventually gets harder to generate because nobody trusts you enough to take the meeting in the first place. The lesson Okta learned the hard way is one worth sitting with. A healthy growth engine needs a scorecard that blends the hustle of demand generation with the slower craft of building a trustworthy brand. And for a company selling identity and security, trust isn't a nice to have. It's the entire currency of the business. When Okta faced high-profile security incidents in 2022 and 2023, the marketing team had a choice: retreat and go quiet, or lean in. They chose to launch the Secure Identity Commitment, a long-term initiative to harden the company's own infrastructure. It was a recognition that in this industry, transparency isn't a PR tactic, it's a core product requirement. Part 4. Winning the developer. By 2021, Okta had won something valuable but incomplete. It had the trust of IT administrators. What it hadn't won was the trust of developers. Developers building customer-facing applications found Okta's interface too rigid, too enterprise, too much like a dashboard designed for HR rather than a toolkit designed for builders. They wanted flexible APIs. Okta didn't have a product that spoke their language, so Okta did something bold. It acquired Auth0 for $6.5 billion, a high-risk, high-reward consolidation play. Here's the part that's easy to get wrong. A lot of companies, after making an acquisition like that, immediately force the acquired brand to disappear into the parent company. Okta didn't. It ran a deliberate dual-brand strategy. Okta remained the name for Workforce Identity Cloud, serving internal IT and security teams. Auth0 remained its own brand, serving external product development teams building customer-facing applications. That decision let Okta tap two entirely different budgets and two entirely different buyers, without forcing either one into an experience built for the other. It's a subtle but important growth lesson. Sometimes the smartest move after an acquisition is restraint. Part 5. The breadth trap. Growth at any cost was the mantra of the 2000s, but markets mature and mantras stop working. In fiscal 2023, Okta posted a GRP operating loss of $812 million. That's a sobering number for any company. What happened next is the more interesting story. Over the following 3 years, Okta swung all the way to profitability, reaching its first full-year GAAP operating profit and a non-GAAP operating income of $766 million by fiscal 2026. And critically, that turnaround didn't come primarily from cutting costs. It came from rebuilding the entire go-to-market engine, led by Chief Revenue Officer John Addison. Addison identified what he called a breadth trap. Okta's portfolio had expanded to include workforce identity, customer identity, governance, and privileged access. That's a lot of surface area for any single salesperson to master, so generalist reps, understandably, defaulted to selling what they already knew well. The newer, often higher-value products sat in the deck underused and underexplained. Addison's fix was specialization. He reorganized the sales field into distinct motions, with separate teams focused on new logos, on the existing customer base, and on Auth0 specifically. This wasn't a cosmetic reorg, it moved real numbers. Newer products like identity governance and privileged access grew into a meaningful share of total bookings, and deals that included them carried a noticeably higher average contract value. This is a growth lesson that applies far beyond identity security. You cannot scale a complex, multi-product platform using a generalist sales motion. As product breadth increases, go-to-market structure has to specialize, or your best innovations simply never convert into revenue. Addison also rethought the sales call itself. In a world where most of the buying decision now happens before a prospect ever talks to a salesperson, he argued that the traditional discovery call, the one where a rep asks a prospect to explain their own problems, was dead. The first call needed to become a validation call. Reps had to show up already holding a point of view, a hypothesis about the customer's situation, using AI tools to handle the administrative grind so they could spend their energy on the parts of selling that are still fundamentally human. Empathy and relationship depth. Part 6. The Partner Engine. Perhaps the most underrated piece of Okta's growth story is its partner ecosystem. In cybersecurity, buyers rarely make a multi-year, company-wide platform bet based on one vendor's sales pitch alone. They want corroboration. They want to hear from someone other than the company trying to sell them something. Addison's internal logic was blunt. You need several trusted partners surrounding a customer, all independently vouching for you. So Okta stopped treating partners as a secondary distribution channel, a box to check, and started treating them as a genuine growth engine. That meant investing in deep partner practices rather than shallow partner programs, building a digital partner community, and rewarding organizations that became true identity experts in their own right. By 2024, the overwhelming majority of Okta's largest deals involved a partner. That ecosystem did something a marketing campaign alone can't do. It created a surface area of trust around Okta that made the platform stickier and made it much harder for a bundled competitor to simply out-discount its way into the deal. Part 7. The Lessons. So what does Okta's story actually teach us about growth? First, neutrality is a strategy, not just a feature. In an era of platform consolidation, where every giant wants to lock you into its ecosystem, being the independent layer that connects everything can be an extraordinary moat. By choosing not to build its own operating system or productivity suite, Okta made itself indispensable to everyone who did. Second, specialization unlocks platforms. You cannot scale a complex product portfolio with a one-size-fits-all sales motion. As your offering grows wider, your go-to-market structure has to grow more specialized, or your newest, most valuable products will quietly die in the sales deck. And there's a product lesson buried in here too. Listen to the no in the market. Okta heard that developers weren't buying its core product, and rather than ignoring that signal, it acted on it. That listening led directly to Auth 0. Third, marketing has to own the economics of trust. Especially in security, brand and pipeline are not separate ledgers, no matter how tempting it is to treat them that way when a quarter gets tight. An obsessive focus on short-term metrics can quietly erode the brand authority you'll need to win the next decade. The durable path pairs demand generation with the slower craft of category leadership and treats the trusted voices surrounding a buyer, partners, analysts, the market itself, as a primary sales force rather than an afterthought. Conclusion. As the era of agentic AI arrives, with organizations racing to deploy AI agents faster than they can actually govern them, Okta is pivoting once again. It's positioning identity as the control plane, not just for human users, but for AI agents acting on their behalf. It's the same thesis that powered its first decade, applied to a new frontier. In a world defined by complexity and constant disruption, the company that wins is the one that governs the access. This was the marketing behind rapid growth. See you in the next episode.